Welcome to the Far Post podcast presented by Esports Gaming League, the official podcast of your first place New England Revolution. That's right. With 7 points from 3 games, the Revs currently sit alone atop the Eastern Conference standings as they've gotten off to their best start in more than 10 years. Exciting stuff happening in Foxborough, and that's why we're here. We're here to talk about it. I'm Jeff Lemieux, alongside my co-host, Elizabeth Pehota. Elizabeth, we always have fun on the job, obviously, but isn't it more fun when the team's in first place?
Absolutely, 100%. We love building up the team, but when you get off to this strong of a start early in the year, to be able to be in first place and have high hopes, it just feels so good. And it's the first time, at least in my tenure with the team, that we've had such a strong start. So I'm excited to be a part of it.
A lot of exciting things happening with the team. A lot of exciting things happening on the Far Post podcast today, because we are joined by such a special guest, someone who has been on the Far Post podcast many, many times before, but always as a player, never as a front office employee. It's a whole new world for Chris Tierney, who we are delighted to have on the show. Chris, welcome back to the Far Post podcast.
It's an honor, Jeff. It's been too long.
It really has. We wanted to let you kind of settle in first. I wanted to immediately hit you with the podcast request, like your first day on the job. But we thought we'd give you a little bit of a chance to settle in, kind of learn the ropes. Then we'll hit you with the Far Post podcast. And now we've got a couple years under your belt in the role to really dig in to the minutia of the everyday role with Chris Tierney now. So that's what we're going to do.
Good. Here come the hard-hitting questions, I'm sure.
Just as they did for your 11 years as a player on the New England Revolution.
That's right.
Chris, does it feel like second nature coming back into this media role, or do you kind of have to brush off the dust a little bit?
There's a little bit of rust that has to be worked out here, but it's fine. I've done enough of this, especially with you two. So all good.
As a player during your 11-year playing career, obviously you kind of have to have a certain approach in interviews. Everyone's always a little more careful because the way that media works is you don't want something taken out of context or twist your words twisted around. So you're always a little bit more reserved in terms of what you're going to say. But now, as a front office employee, I just want to say this is a safe space. You can just let loose, say whatever you want about whatever you want. Just let it all out on the Far Post podcast.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go nuts. Let's see if I can get some bulletin board material for other teams. That's really what I need to be doing here.
Yeah, exactly. They'll love you in the office if you do that.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny because I feel like we've talked about this in other forums in the past, but you always did step up when you were a player. You were one of those guys who, unfortunately for you, you were so good at being diplomatic with your answers that we kind of went to you in a lot of the tougher situations. It's that double-edged sword. Because you were good at it, we were like, hey, we're going to lean on you a little bit. But it was so very much appreciated. But I do remember one time, the beginning of a season, I think we lost the first 2 games, and we went to you after the first game just to get kind of the general, hey, tough start to the season thoughts. And it was just a one-on-one, me and you. The second game we lost, I think the full media scrum went to you. So we just kind of followed and stuck the camera in there. And after the game, after that second one, I think you were like, hey, always happy to help out. I'll always chat. You know that. But the next time we lose, can you talk to someone else so it doesn't become like Chris Tierney, face of the New England Revolution every time we lose?
Well, I would always say, if you saw my face on the post-game interview the next morning, you know that we lost the game.
Yeah, apologies for that. But hey, now we get you on the podcast while the team's off to a 2-0-1 start. So since we've kind of already touched upon that off the top, let's start there. Talk about the current team, because you're a former player who's not that far removed from it. So a lot of the guys who are on this current team are former teammates of yours. You're now in a front office role where you're involved in building the team that's on the field. So for you right now, what's kind of the excitement level like as you've watched these first few games and kind of seen this team build into the beginning of the 2021 season?
Well, yeah, I think it's as strong a start as you could really hope for. 7 points from 9 games is a good turnaround. If we can keep that pace, we'll be in good shape at the end of the year. But with the same breath, it's early. It's early in the season. I think other teams are still trying to figure themselves out a little bit. I think we returned a really good group from last year, and that run that we had down the stretch towards the end of the season last year, I think that momentum rolled over a good amount into this year. And then, I think we strengthened in some key positions, added some good guys that are really going to help us on the field, but that are also really good additions to the group in terms of their personality. So I think the way that the staff has blended those guys in, the general feeling around the building is really good right now, and that's always a huge part of it. The culture, the attitude of the players, the way that the staff interacts with the players, all really positive right now. So hopefully the guys can keep it rolling.
Chris, that feeling that you mentioned, that there's a lot of positivity around the office. I'm curious, as someone who's been on the other side as a player and now as a front office employee, is it all the same feeling? Like, are we feeling the same things as staff that you guys feel, or does it hit at a different level when you're a player?
Yeah, I think everyone can kind of feel it. Anyone who follows the team closely, I'm sure you guys feel it. There's certainly periods in my career where you'd show up to work and everyone's a little bit on edge, and and everyone's not really looking each other in the eyes. It's not so friendly because things aren't going great. I mean, fans feel it, staff feels it. The people who work in our cafeteria feel it. It's something that's really hard to achieve, but it's so valuable in terms of how things go for you over the course of the season. So it's definitely earned with this group. You can't manufacture a good culture, a good feeling around the place. And this group of players, the staff has done a really good job of, so far at least, of getting the good feelings back around this place.
Yeah, the winning helps, obviously, but it does feel like Bruce is kind of a master of creating that type of culture. It feels like people always talk about that with Bruce Arena teams, that he is able to foster that kind of culture.
No question. I mean, I think if you look over the course of Bruce's career, and a lot of those teams that we played against when I was playing, the team that Bruce had in 2014 that beat us in MLS Cup, a bunch of those LA teams he coached, the DC teams back in the day. I mean, any of the players that have played for Bruce always talk about the culture around the place and how he treats the players. And all of that has rang true in my time here. All of my interactions with Bruce since I've been a part of the staff have been really eye-opening for me in terms of how a really top level manager manages the people in the organization. And it's no surprise to me that he's had the success he's had, because he's that kind of leader.
I want to delve into more on working day to day with Bruce a little bit later in the show, but you mentioned it's so early in the season, right? So no one's really judging anything about the 2021 MLS season 3 weeks in, because there's still so much that's going to play out over the course of the next few months as everybody kind of settles into the season. And I don't think there's anybody who would argue at this point, certainly within the organization, that the Revs are firing on all cylinders right now. It's not like there have been perfect performances through the first 3 games, but to turn the performances into 7 points from 9, it feels like that's the most important thing, because this team has struggled to get off to good starts in years past, where maybe they're still kind of figuring things out and the points weren't coming. But this year, still figuring things out, and you're picking up the points. Those are going to be valuable points come later in the season.
No question. And look, at MLS, there's so much parity in this league because of the way that the league's structured, that you're going to see teams go through dips in form. You're going to see teams go on runs. You're going to see teams struggle at different times. And it's how you work through the periods where you're not necessarily firing on all cylinders. And not to say that we haven't been, but the performances definitely haven't been perfect by any means. I think they've been really good for the most part. But like you said, to be picking up points when you're not necessarily even at your absolute peak yet, I think is a good indication of a good team.
Yeah, if anyone ever asks me about how crazy MLS can be, I honestly point to that 2014 team, because you had a stretch at the beginning of the season. You won 5 straight games, felt like you're on top of the world, literally going an 8-game losing streak in the middle of the season, longest losing streak in club history, and then go 9-1-1 to finish the season and go on a run to MLS Cup. And I know there were other factors kind of happening throughout the course of that season, but that's just absurd in and of itself, to have a team win 5 straight, lose 8 straight, and then basically win 10 straight. It's just a weird league, man, but it's fun to be part of.
It's momentum. It's the power of momentum. It works both ways. Mm-hmm. And you put a couple losses together, it's every bit as devastating as how nice it is when you put a couple wins together. Things snowball quickly in whatever direction you're going. And the question is, when things start to unravel a little bit, how quickly can you stop the leak? And when things are going well, how can you continue to, work new players in that challenge the current players in those spots to continue to improve. So there's, momentum's everything in this game, and especially in this league where it's so competitive.
You played on some teams with some pretty top tier talent. I mean, you joined the team in 2008. So you're right at the end of that stretch from 05 to 07 with that team that won 3 straight Eastern Conference championships. I mean, you played alongside Shalry Joseph and Taylor Twellman and Steve Ralston and Michael Parkhurst and Jay Heaps and Matt Reese, and then on and on and on. All these guys who are kind of considered, legends within this club. I want to ask, because Carlos keeps coming up in these conversations now. He's only been with the club for 3 seasons, but where does he kind of rank for you in terms of how he stacks up against some of the best players? Not in terms of longevity yet, obviously, but in terms of pure talent, where Carlos kind of stacks up amongst that group.
Yeah, I mean, I always get a little bit uncomfortable with comparing him to players of the past because the league was different. The players around, the Shalry Josephs, the Taylor Twellman, some of the other real legends of this club were, it was completely different teams. But I think Carlos is in the elite of the elite in this league. And for me, I think there's a good chance he might go down as the best player in the history of this club up to this point. That's just my personal opinion, but watching how the guy works, watching how he trains, the level he plays at, the type of person he is, the type of leader he is, how much he's respected by the other players here. He's something special. There's no question about it.
Now, I know you didn't get to play alongside Carlos, but what if you're on Carlos's team? There's a free kick 25 yards out, and someone's going to take it with their left foot. What's the conversation like between you and Carlos?
It's non-existent because I'm on the field to take free kicks, and if he's on the field, then he's taking them. So then there's no need for me to be out there.
What about if Dave Vandenberg's in the mix? Who's taking it at that point?
Dave. I must say, Dave's left foot is something else to this day.
Yeah,
I'm actually convinced that Dave could still play. He might not have the stamina, but if you threw Dave Vandenberg in a game to the last 10 minutes, he'd do completely fine. He'd probably do really well, actually.
Yeah, we've had this conversation amongst staff many times, standing on the sidelines, watching Dave jump in, and it's just like that dude can still play. Especially,
he's good.
on a dead ball situation, he would have one of the best left feet in Major League Soccer. Right? This is no exaggeration. It is unbelievable.
He's ridiculous. He really is. That left foot is something else, and that's coming from a guy who was a little bit of a one-trick pony. But I had one trick, and it was left foot. But his is another level.
I love how he's always willing to jump into drills too. I thought maybe when he first came in, it was just like, the enthusiasm and all that, but nope, you still go out there and I feel like almost every training session, he's in at least one drill and helping out however he can.
Yeah. And I've had coaches over the course of my career that hopped in and all the guys kind of roll their eyes because the level drops a little bit. And you always feel like you have to play it to the coach to keep him happy and whatnot. But Dave hops in and it's just like, another guy in training. It's the level stays exactly where it was, if not gets better. So
at least we're beyond the days of, 08, 09, 2010, where you'd need an equipment manager to jump in and play left back. We had some interesting training sessions back in the day.
Yeah. Well, now you have Dave Vandenberg and Shalry Joseph jumping in for numbers. So the level has upped a little bit in that department for sure.
So I'm going to get to that for sure. But before we moved on from that, I wanted to ask about Andrew Farrell as well, because this is a conversation we had a little bit yesterday. And we talk about legends of this club. We talk about that 05, 06, 07 team. And it's the names who come up like Matt Reese and Shalry Joseph and Steve Ralston and Taylor Twellman. It was like that group of players. But Andrew Farrell is a player who I think it's going to surprise people later this season, very likely later this season, when Andrew Farrell becomes the club all-time leader in games played, games started, and minutes played. That is coming up within his next 20 appearances or so. And there's 31 games left in this season. So in all likelihood, Andrew Farrell is going to be the club leader in every major game played minute category at the age of 29 later this year. So just wanted to get your perspective kind of on what he's given to this club over the past 8 or 9 years, and where he should fall kind of in that how he should be mentioned in the same breath as some of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we were chatting yesterday, and I think I had seen, maybe you or someone else had tweeted about it, or there was a story written about how he had passed Jay Heaps in his appearance totals. And I mean, I played with Andrew for a long time. I know the type of guy he is, the type of player he is, but for some reason, I just have this feeling that he's not recognized for in my opinion, already legend of this club that he is. I mean, his consistency, when you really think about it, is it's just extremely impressive. I mean, he's been a first choice player for this club from the day he was drafted. And not only that, he's played at an extremely high level, was an all-star. His fitness record is, and I certainly am not trying to jinx him at all here. The guy's always available. He's always ready to play. He plays in the Open Cup. He plays, on the road. He plays at home. He plays on short rest. The guy's just a machine. And knowing what Andrew brings within a group, having played alongside him and watching him continue to progress throughout his career, I'm just so impressed by the guy. He for me is one of the real heartbeats of this team and this club. He's bilingual. He does so many things behind the scenes to include our foreign players, our Spanish speaking players into the group. And I just have so much respect for the guy. And I know it came up in conversation the other day, but I really do put him up there with the best players that have been at this club.
Chris, I know that you talked a little bit about the greatness of Andrew Farrell. And when you look back at that run in 2014, you were one of more of the veteran players along with the Matt Reeses and other names that were kind of thrown out there. But as you look now to this squad in 2021 that has a really strong roster, is in the conversation to hopefully be a contender. And Andrew Farrell's one of those guys that's kind of at the forefront of being a veteran and leading the charge there. What's that like for you as a former player and someone who saw him so young and early in that run, now having that experience to be a leader in this sort of situation?
Yeah, well, it's not surprising to me. I think that's just the natural evolution of guys like Andrew who are so consistent and bring it every day. I mean, Andrew's respect is gained from the guys by the way he carries himself around here, but just the way he is every day. You get the same Andrew. He's so consistent. He's always there in training. He's always there in games. He's always a positive influence in terms of his attitude, the way he conducts himself around here, the way he interacts with all the players and staff. I mean, he's just so well liked. And then, there's other guys that I played with that are still around that I think have moved into those leadership roles as well. You look at Teal Bunbury, who I put up there in terms of character and work ethic and guys you want on your side. He's up there with anyone I think that I ever played with. Scotty Caldwell is another of those guys that's just an absolute rock in terms of what he brings to the squad. And you see Matt Turner, I think, moving into a leadership role, who was a young player when I came in. But if you look at a guy that is a success story for any young player who's entering this league, I think you look no further than Matt Turner, who, quite honestly, when he first came to the team, he has got these size 12 feet and he could barely kick the ball to half field. And you look at Matt now, I think he's got a great set of feet. And I think he, in my opinion, is the best goalkeeper in Major League Soccer. So to see these guys evolve from the days that I played with them to their leadership roles and how valuable they are to our group now, it's not surprising to me, but I'm just really happy that we have them here and that they have managed to stay at this club for as long as they have.
You mentioned Turner. It's funny because throughout the course of if you're at a club for a long time, there are so many guys who come through, particularly at the goalkeeper position, who come into the club as a third or fourth string keeper and leave the club as a third or fourth string keeper. And you kind of never expect them to move beyond that. So when Matt came in and he starts out as this young, undrafted keeper, third string, you kind of have this idea that, oh, this, maybe this kid's going to be here for a couple of years. He's going to move on. We'll sign another third string keeper. So to see him in the span of 3-4 seasons go from that to potential number one, number two, when you're talking about the U.S. national team right now, that's a pretty precipitous rise over the course of not a very long amount of time.
It is. And I mean, all the credit goes to Matt. For how I think raw he was when he got here, you always saw the athletic ability and his shot stopping ability. I mean, he was, the third choice goalkeeper, but the guy who we tended to like to face least when we were playing in training. And to see how hard Matt worked with when I was playing, Remy Roy was the goalkeeper coach who works with me in the scouting department now. And Remy was not easy on Matt. He really grinded Matt down in those early years. And I think really, really fortified Matt's work ethic. And credit to Matt, he took on everything the coaches were telling him in those early years and has developed to, like I said, in my opinion, the elite goalkeeper in this league. So all the credit goes to Matt. It's nothing that the system or the coaches really try to take credit for. It's credit to Matt. He's really developed into an elite player.
I want to start talking now a little bit about your new role with the team, because we really haven't had that conversation with you yet. But one of the guys who came up that we've talked about as a legend of this club who you played with is Shalri Joseph, who is now your coworker. Shalri, the head coach of the under-15 side, he also helps out with the first team in training sessions, as you mentioned. So, are you and I want to give a picture for Revolution fans here. You and Shalri hanging out at the water cooler talking about what you watched on TV last night. What's it like when you bump into Shalri in the office?
It's great. I've been really good friends with Shalri for a long time. Shalri was so good to me when I first came in as a rookie. Shalri was the captain, the heartbeat of this club, the leader of the team at the time. He was so great with young players like me in terms of helping us develop into actual professionals. So to now have Shalri as our U15s coach, I think it's a perfect role for Shalri. I mean, imagine if you're a 14-year-old kid and you join the New England Revolution Academy and you're coached by Shalri Joseph. I mean, it's just a dream come true for these kids, and there's no better guy to teach our young players how to become pros. But yeah, Shalri is such a great addition to this club. He's just such a good person. He's such a hard worker. He's just a guy that I have a ton of respect for with the way that he carries himself, conducts himself, and it's great to have him back. He's just a great personality and a great guy.
He's one of those guys too. You mentioned he jumps into training and he looks like he could still play.
He absolutely can. His high-speed running might not be at the same level that it used to be, but his skill and touch is still there. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, just patrol the center circle. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
Now, on that note, but when last time we talked to you in an interview setting, I think was on the pregame show, before you had actually even accepted the role as player recruitment manager. And at that point, you're probably about a year or so out from the ACL injury. And at that point, you said you had not kicked a ball in a year. Does that still hold true? Have you still not kicked a ball since retirement?
You know what? My first time kicking a ball was in preseason this year. We had a few staff games. So I got coerced into playing by Dave Vandenberg, Richie Williams, all these guys wanted to have a pickup game. So that was my first run out. And it didn't go great, to be honest. I just don't really have it. Not surprisingly, when you don't touch a ball for almost 2 years, the game isn't quite where it used to be, but oh well.
Chris, what's that transition like, going from being a professional athlete to, I don't want to say a normal person, but you know what I mean? Like that before the game was what you had, it was your fitness, it was your job. And then what's that transition like to someone like you who is still really fit and values being in shape? How do you kind of balance how that goes?
Yeah, you know what? I found basically right away that I had to get away from the game for a little bit in terms of playing it, just because of my knee, and I had some hip issues. So I actually took up distance running, like I know you did, Elizabeth, and you ran the marathon. Congrats. I was actually training for the Boston Marathon, but decided I kind of want to wait to give it a go until I can do it on the real course. So I kind of threw my my athletic endeavors into distance running for a while. I was training for the marathon, and it's just a good way to kind of channel it. I'll always stay active and stay fit. It's been a huge part of my life, so I just had to kind of find another avenue for it.
Was it nice to just kind of have a schedule? I know for me, I would be going on long runs like once a week. Did you kind of make out a schedule like you had with soccer where it was like, okay, you have training sessions for X, Y, and Z days? Did you have some sort of similarities with that?
Yeah, I did for sure. I think scheduling it was really important for me. You know, as a pro athlete, you're always told where to be and what time to train and how long to go for. So I kind of had to do the same thing on my own, which was difficult at first, but it was fun to try something new.
I don't know if you saw, I wrote a story last year about a former teammate of yours, Wells Thompson, who's got into ultra marathoning. And he actually had a fundraiser where he ran 100 miles.
That's crazy.
In 24 hours. So you don't want to just hop in with Wells and run for 24 straight hours?
No, thank you. Credit to Wells, but I don't have the time or the energy.
We can high five on the Boston course one time.
Yeah, maybe.
For people who know Wells, like that sounds like something you'd like. That didn't surprise me when Wells was like, I'm going to run 100 miles in 24 hours. I was like, that sounds like something Wells would do.
It does. Yeah. He was a man of extremes. That's for sure.
What do you do with that as far as sleeping goes? Like you don't sleep, right? You just keep running?
Not for 24 hours. No.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
No, thanks. No, thank you.
But we mentioned you in the front office. We mentioned Shalri on the coaching staff. You get Charlie, who is another former teammate of yours, who was in a club ambassador role, who's now on the commentary team. And this is kind of a trend we've seen recently, certainly with the Revs. We've seen a lot of recent former players join the club in a bunch of different capacities. So what do you think the value is in keeping players, former players, involved with the club in all these different types of roles?
Well, I think it's important to both show the current players that there's a pathway to a career after you finish playing. And I'll speak for myself. It's difficult when you retire. You invest so much time and energy in one thing, and to be a professional athlete, you have to have a very concentrated focus on performing, and it's difficult to prepare for what's next. I happen to have some time to be able to do so, basically because of my injury. I retired a few years earlier than probably I thought I would have, but it kind of forced me to think about what I really wanted to do next. And I knew that I wanted to stay in the game, and the new staff that came in was nice enough to give me that opportunity. And I think that they see the value of having people around that know the club well, know the landscape of Revolution soccer, of New England soccer. And I think it's good to have former players involved. They know what it takes to be a part of this community. And I think there's good opportunities for our players to help us move forward in the next chapter of Revolution soccer.
And as you were contemplating that next move, obviously there's a few different pathways you can go staying involved in the game. We've mentioned three of them with you, Shalri, and Charlie. You kind of all took different pathways to stay involved in the game. Did coaching ever was there ever a pull to try coaching? What led you into a front office role?
Yeah, I kind of always thought that a front office role made more sense for me. I was never really that interested in coaching. Just knowing, I've had a lot of friends who are in coaching, and it's a very, very challenging profession. Not to say that what I'm doing isn't, but it's just it's a different sort of endeavor. And I felt like I had, been on the field so much in the last 11 years that I wanted to explore this side of things. And I've really enjoyed what I'm doing so far. I've learned a lot from the great staff here. Had some, couldn't ask for better mentors in terms of our technical director, Kurt Analfo, and working with Remy Roy in the scouting department, and of course, Bruce and his staff. So it's been a really good introduction for me into this side of things. And I'm looking forward to continuing to grow in the role.
You've been in this role now for coming up on 2 years as the player recruitment manager, which seems crazy because I still remember doing the first interview with you when you were hired, because I think the last 2 years have been so crazy. Everything feels like it's all blended together at this point. We've kind of you talked a little bit about making that transition from someone who kind of identifies themselves for so long as soccer player. And that's not just your professional career. I mean, that I'm sure goes back to high school for you. You were probably in high school. You were a soccer player. In college, you were a soccer player. At the professional level, for so long, you were a soccer player. And a lot of guys have talked about how difficult it is to make that transition from athlete to, normal person with normal job. So I know for you, even though it's not, a typical office job where you're necessarily sitting in a cubicle for 8 hours a day typing away, you do work in an office, you do have a cubicle. So like, what has that transition been like for you, going from someone who comes to the training center every day and trains to someone who sits at a desk and works? Because I'd imagine that can be a difficult transition.
It is. And I think any player that makes that transition would be lying to you if they said that there's not an adjustment period, because like I said, you get into such a routine as a professional athlete. And although I have a routine now, it's just an entirely different one. But like I said, I've really enjoyed it. My favorite part about playing was the challenge of it. And my favorite part about my new role is taking on a new challenge. So in the same way I had to apply myself to get better as a player, I'm doing the same now in this role. So that same, competitive mindset, that same drive that I think made me a semi-successful professional soccer player is going to help in this new role. I mean, it's definitely different, but like I said, I've really enjoyed it so far. You stay involved with the game. I still, get to be out on the field a decent amount, and of course, am out scouting, so get to watch plenty of games in person and on our video platform. So it's not like I'm, crunching numbers all day on a spreadsheet or something like that. It's still mainly soccer focused, which of course I enjoy.
Chris, what part about it was the part that took you the longest to get used to? Like, was it correcting yourself from saying, I play for the New England Revolution to I work for? Like, what was the most surprising part about the transition that you might not have anticipated?
I had enough time away after I retired that I was kind of over the playing part. It's not like I was showing up and walking into the locker room every day. But it's just it's a different schedule. As a player, you come in and you do your work basically from somewhere around 8 o'clock to, 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're back at your house, and then you're resting on your couch or doing whatever else you do to get ready for training or games the next day. My days are definitely a lot longer now. Not as exhausting physically, but far more exhausting intellectually. So it's, like I said, it's a different challenge. My schedule is definitely, longer days at the office, but like I said, I really enjoy the challenge of what I'm doing now. It's just took a little bit of time to adjust to the new schedule, as you'd expect, but I think I'm starting to get in the groove here nicely.
You touched upon it a little bit, but what is kind of your day-to-day like? I'm sure no days are exactly the same, but as player recruitment manager, if someone says, okay, well, what do you do? What is kind of your day-to-day role?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way I can boil it down is I work in the scouting department, which is, like I said, led by our technical director, Kurt Anolfo. Remy Roy, who was the goalkeeper coach in my time and moved into his player personnel role under Brad Friedel, is also a part of that. And basically what our group is trying to do is bring in the best players we can at all different levels of the organization. So that's academy players, that's players for our USL team, which we started last year. And of course, players for the first team. That's both through the draft and, international signing. So we basically spend our time working on those different groups of players and vetting players that we think are potential targets for us, doing our homework on those players in terms of watching them play soccer, find out what we can learn about their personalities, their personal lives, and anything else that gives us an indication of whether they'd be a good fit for our group. So I think that's really the easiest way I can boil it down for you.
And it's obviously still the very early stages of Revolution 2, last year being the first season that the club actually played matches. But already you're seeing the pathway, and there are clear examples of the pathway from Revolution 2 to the first team. Last year, obviously, Colin Verfurth was a little bit of a unique example because he signed with Revs 2 and then signed with the first team before he ever played a match with Revs 2. But you had John Bell come in last year and play for Revs 2, sign with the first team his second year. Maciel, who signed with Revs 2, was a standout player last year, signed with the first team, and then became the first player to actually graduate essentially from Revs 2 and appear in a first team match this past weekend against Atlanta. So even though it's the very early stages, how rewarding has that been for you to already within the first year kind of see that pathway unfold for a few players to go from recruiting to Revs 2, proving themselves with Revs 2, and now playing with the first team?
Yeah, to be honest with you, Jeff, that's really been the most rewarding part of my time here in this role so far. I mean, like I said, we started this thing last year in terms of our USL team. So we made 15 new player signings before the season started. And, so we basically started a team completely from scratch. And, we signed those 15 USL players to supplement our academy players that can play with our USL team. And to see 3 of those guys already make the transition to the first team, I mean, that's the ultimate goal of why we started this thing. We want to have that pathway from our academy through Revs 2 to our first team. And to see that, we already have a guy in Maciel who's not only signed to the first team, but already contributing in year 2 of the program, I think that's a pretty good indication of how valuable this thing can be for us.
Could you tell pretty early with Maciel that he was going to have the potential to play at the next level? Because he's a guy who a lot of people his name came up a lot last year. People saying, watching this guy at the USL League One level, it looks like he's a little bit of a step ahead and that this guy's game is going to translate to MLS.
I will say we did have a good feeling early on. I mean, Maciel came here in Revolution 2 preseason last season, and he showed up. Maciel is from Rio, played for Botafogo's academy, and he showed up not speaking a word of English. He'd never been to the United States before, so we had an idea that there would be an adjustment period, but we didn't think that it would be as short or as easy as it was. I mean, he is adjusted incredibly well for such a young kid coming to a new country without his family here, without knowing anyone. And it's, a big credit to our Revolution 2 staff, and with Clint and Marcelo, who's Portuguese speaking, who was our assistant coach, who I think did really well to communicate with Maciel early on. I think that was really helpful. But in terms of Maciel's game, I mean, I think you've seen the way that the other players have spoken about him, that Bruce has spoken about him. He plays the game at his own speed. He's just incredibly composed for his age. He's so good in possession. He's a great passer of the ball. He's just a really, really nice, naturally talented player. I mean, it's really hard to appreciate his game unless you've kind of watched him over a period of time, which hopefully I think he'll get the chance to do now. But I think Revolution fans will really come to appreciate how nuanced his game is and how sophisticated it is for a kid who's 21 years old.
I'm interested to know, when you're scouting for Revs 2, I'd imagine the scouting process, kind of what you're looking for in a player, is probably a little bit different when you're scouting for a first team player or when you're scouting for someone you're looking to bring in to Revs 2, because I think there might be an idea that when you're scouting to bring in a player, you probably go watch a game. Okay, there's 22 players in the field. Which player is the best player? That's the guy we try to bring in. But I'm sure it's probably a little more nuanced than that. So when you're trying to bring players into Revs 2, who are going to have the potential to rise ultimately to the first team, how are you kind of scouting for a Revolution 2 player? Are there any specific types of things you're looking for that might differ from simply that's the best player, let's try to get him?
Yeah, I mean, with the major qualifier for players that come into our Revolution 2 programs is the question number one is, do you think this guy has a chance to evolve to the first team? And if the answer to that question is no, then we tend to pass on that player. So you're looking at potential. The guys that you bring into our USL program are by no means finished products. They're guys that we think have certain attributes that make them special in their current state, but more importantly, have attributes that we think they can really improve upon. And with competitive games, take those attributes and add others that make them players that can contribute at a first team level. So I think you're right in saying that it's a little bit different in how you evaluate potential players for Revs 2 versus Revs 1. But in terms of there's definitely a specific set of qualities that you want to see in terms of athletic ability, technical ability, that you want to see certain levels that you think can at least progress to the level that's required to play in MLS.
As you were settling into this role last year, kind of doing this for the first time, we mentioned you joined the team in this role in August 2019. So you didn't have a ton of time to settle in before the world kind of flipped upside down. You've got the Revolution 2 season, which was supposed to begin and then got pushed all the way back, and kind of that got thrown into a little bit of uncertainty. So how did the craziness of the last year and the pandemic and all that, how did that affect you kind of settling into the role and trying to kind of figure things out as you went?
Yeah, it certainly made things difficult. I mean, a big part of the role is being on the ground and on the road and watching games in person. And we just really weren't able to do that last year, of course, because of the pandemic. So luckily these days you can watch every game in the world in every league from your computer. So we've got scouting platforms that pretty much allow us to track and watch as many players as we have time for. So it's a different way to work, but it's an adjustment that everyone had to make. And, in my opinion, it's always better to see players live. I think you pick up on things that you see in person that sometimes you don't necessarily see on video. So it's definitely made it a little bit more challenging, but, with a little time and effort, which we had plenty of time this year because of our inability to travel, I think we did a fairly good job of finding some guys that we think will help us out.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit because it has been a year or two filled with a lot of new challenges, a lot of big life changes for you. But there's another pretty significant life change coming up for you. Just wanted to ask about the Tierney clan soon expanding and how exciting it is to be, as we kind of announce, I'm sure, to the fan base, that you will soon be Papa Tierney.
Yes. Yeah, very excited. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, my wife Eliza is 7 months pregnant, so we're not too far away here. But yeah, I'm really excited. I've always was in the plans to have kids, and the time was right. So I'm excited for, it's been a nice transition from playing to this new role, and I'm looking forward to the new role of dad. So I'm sure I have a lot to learn in that department as well, but I'm very excited.
Chris, are you guys planning to find out whether it's a boy or a girl? Is that between you and Eliza? How are you guys handling that one?
Yes, we do know, but we're keeping that and any potential name choices private for now.
That's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations again. And how many, you do have a lot of guys, at least in that locker room too, who you can go to, former teammates of yours, guys who've obviously had children recently or have older children. So are you planning to, or have you had a lot of conversations with guys in the locker room just to kind of get an idea of what's coming?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I've been thoroughly coached by all the soccer dads around here. Yeah. So I've got plenty of good people to go to when things get crazy.
You could go to Bruce Arena for fatherhood advice as well. Sure.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where I want to finish, because you have this opportunity. You mentioned in your first job post playing career to be in a front office role, learning day to day from so many people, one of whom is Bruce Arena, probably the most legendary name in American soccer history, certainly in terms of coaching. So one, I guess I want to get a sense, because obviously there was the Virginia connection. You went to Virginia, so I'm sure Bruce was he wasn't obviously coaching there, but I'm sure anytime you're a player at Virginia, Bruce Arena is kind of part of the picture. So what was there any sort of relationship there with Bruce before you started working with him? And what has it been like just learning and working with Bruce Arena on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I had actually never, of course, at UVA, there's the legend of Bruce that, he's held in such high regard at Virginia. I'd actually never met Bruce personally until he got the job here. Competed against him plenty of times, had, of course, a healthy respect for the way that his teams played. In my work with the MLS Players Association, my time playing, I spoke with a lot of players who had worked under Bruce and always picked their brains on what made him so special. And, they just consistently say it's the way that he treats and understands people and his experience and his knowledge of the game. I mean, I must say in my time that I've spent with him in the 2 years that I've been here, he certainly lives up to the legend. I think he's a really special person. He's different than any of the coaches that I ever played for. But you certainly understand why he's held in such high regard when you work with him closely day to day.
It's interesting to you say he's different than any coach you ever played for, because there was, I think it might have been Brad Feldman on Outside the Booth earlier this week, made a connection, and stay with me here, kind of made a connection between Bruce and Stevie Nicol, in the sense that you hear about both of them. A lot of what you hear about both of them is that the brilliance of them as a leader and as a manager isn't necessarily in the minutia of the tactical approach. Obviously, both of them heavily involved with soccer for a long time and know more about the game than I will ever, or most of us will ever know. But it seems like the brilliance in both Bruce and Stevie was in knowing how to manage a group of guys and knowing how to bring a group of individuals together to get the most out of them individually and the most out of them as a team. So do you see kind of any links between Stevie and Bruce in that sense?
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, Jeff, I do think that's probably the closest comparison I could make in terms of a coach that I played for and Bruce. I think Bruce is, one of the crucial parts of his philosophy is just letting the players be the players. I don't think he finds the need to involve himself in, like you said, some of the minutia, or he gives the players a healthy respect for their own space, their own interactions with each other. And he's so good at realizing how important that is from a player perspective, to have a coach who lets you have your own personality, lets you have your own space. I mean, it's everything you want as a pro soccer player. And then, of course, his pedigree in terms of his experience and his ability tactically, it's a very impressive package.
So you're saying that on a preseason trip, you didn't want to be told tonight is movie night and we're all getting on a bus and going to watch the same movie together? You've seen it. We've seen it both ways, right? There are two extremes of kind of handling. It seems like Bruce is very much on the extreme of like, let the guys be players, let them be individuals. And then there can be the like, all right, we're going to force this group to be a team. And sometimes that works too. But Bruce definitely seems to be the other end of that spectrum of like, no, we'll let those relationships kind of form organically. Because if you try to force them, you see, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you give any player the choice between what you mentioned in the former and the latter there, they're all going to go for the latter.
How great would it too? Now we see in present time, as digital departments expand and access expands, you see so many cameras in locker rooms and capturing pregame speeches and team meetings and stuff. I wish that we had Stevie around during that time, because I'm sure that we would have captured some incredible content if we'd been able to get cameras in some Stevie Nicol team meetings and locker room speeches.
Most definitely, but none of which you would be allowed to show publicly because of the explicit content. But yes, Stevie Nicol was one of the greatest characters. I'll give you a quick story, Jeff, that I told you the other day. So on my on my first preseason with the Revolution in 2009, I think it was. We were in North Carolina, and it was the last day of preseason. So all the guys on the team went out for, our celebratory night out to mark the end of preseason. And I was a rookie, so I was terrified. And, some of the older players said, you have to come. And I said, I can't, I'm a rookie. I can't do this on my first trip. So I go along with the group reluctantly, and we stay out too late, maybe have a few too many beers. And walking back to the hotel at like 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and the bus is scheduled to leave at like 6 a.m. And Stevie Nickel's standing right outside the hotel. And so I like sheepishly walk up to Stevie, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I understand if, it's not going to work out here. I know I'm a rookie and this is not good. And he said, you're right. This isn't good. The bus leaves at 6 a.m. and you're back at 3 a.m. You should be out there for 3 more hours. What the hell are you doing back here at the hotel? So that's a little insight into the type of guy that Stevie was.
It really is. There's probably no short story that encapsulates Stevie more than that. And I know after you told me that story, I told you a couple follow-up stories that I can't and won't share here. But we should absolutely, when the day comes, we'll get together, we'll write a book. It'll be, I don't know if we'll be able to share it with the public, but I feel like the stories do need to at least get down somewhere. So at some point they could be passed on to future generations, because there was just too much classic happenings with that Stevie Nickel coached Revolution team.
Yes,
for it to stay unheard to the fan base.
Yeah, one day it'll all come out.
All right, well, Chris, I know we've taken up plenty of your day here. I'm sure you have much more important things to do, like going and actually building the roster for Revolution 2 and the Revolution first team. So we'll let you get back to that. But congratulations again on your impending fatherhood. We're so excited for you. Thanks for taking the time. Love having you around. And we'll get you back on the Far Post podcast very soon.
I hope so. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Chris.